When Marcus Reed walked into court, he was just another defendant facing trumped-up charges. The judge laughed at him. The prosecutor barely took him seriously. The officer who arrested him was certain he had already won. But Marcus wasn't just any defendant. By the time he pulled out his Department of Justice badge, the entire courtroom was about to turn upside down. What started as a routine case quickly unraveled into something much bigger, a hidden system of corruption, buried evidence, and a police chief willing to do anything to keep the truth from coming out. The deeper Marcus dug, the more dangerous the game became. And when the most powerful figures in the city realized they were exposed, they did what they always do: they fought back. How far does this conspiracy go? And will Marcus make it out alive with the truth? Stick around, because this is one story you don't want to miss. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss stories like this, and let us know in the comments where in the world are you watching from. Marcus Reed adjusted his tie, suppressing a sigh as he stood before the courtroom. His charges? Reckless driving and resisting arrest. The arresting officer, Deputy Trent Calloway, sat smugly across from him. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Linda Palmer, was already flipping through her notes, ready to bury him under a pile of legal jargon. And then there was Judge Ronald Whitaker, a man known for his impatience and frequent dismissals of defendants like Marcus. "Mr. Reed," Judge Whitaker said, barely holding back a chuckle, "you are defending yourself today? Are you sure that is wise?" The courtroom chuckled. Marcus kept his composure. "Your Honor, I believe I have the right to a fair hearing." "You do," Whitaker replied, leaning forward. "But let's be honest. People who defend themselves rarely win." Another chuckle from the gallery. Marcus knew what this was. Another routine humiliation. Another case where a man like him would be dismissed without consideration. He glanced at the jury. Some were already checking their watches. "Officer Calloway," Palmer called out, "would you please recount the events of Mr. Reed's arrest?" Calloway stood confidently, smirking. "Of course. I pulled Mr. Reed over for speeding. When I asked for his license and registration, he became aggressive. He refused to comply, stepped out of the vehicle. And where is the footage from your dash cam?" Marcus interrupted. Palmer shot him a glare. "The footage is unavailable. A technical malfunction." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's convenient." Judge Whitaker sighed. "Mr. Reed, you will get your chance to speak. Let the officer finish." Marcus clenched his jaw. He had seen this before. The system protecting itself. But he was ready. "Please continue, officer," Palmer prompted. Calloway cleared his throat. "As I was saying, Mr. Reed refused to comply, making me fear for my safety. I had to subdue him." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "By slamming me onto the hood of my car and twisting my arm behind my back." Calloway smirked. "I did what was necessary." More chuckles from the gallery. Marcus exhaled slowly. He needed to play this carefully. "Your Honor," Marcus said, "I would like to question the officer directly." Whitaker waved a hand. "Proceed. But keep it brief." Marcus turned to Calloway. "Officer, did you inform me why I was being detained before you used force?" Calloway hesitated. I told you to step out of the vehicle." Marcus nodded. "And when I asked why, did you give a reason?" Calloway clenched his jaw. "You were acting suspiciously." Marcus tilted his head. "Suspicious? For asking a question?" Palmer interrupted. "Objection. The defendant is badgering the witness." "Sustained," Whitaker said, rolling his eyes. "Move along, Mr. Reed." Marcus took a deep breath. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sleek leather badge holder. The courtroom fell silent. "Your Honor," he said, his voice calm but firm. "I am Marcus Reed, Special Investigator for the Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division." Judge Whitaker paled. Palmer's pen slipped from her fingers. Calloway's smirk vanished. The room that had been laughing at him seconds ago was now frozen in stunned silence. "Now," Marcus continued, flipping his badge open, "I believe we need to take a closer look at this case." For a long moment, the courtroom was silent. Judge Whitaker's face had lost all amusement. Palmer's mouth opened slightly, as if she wanted to object but couldn't find the words. Officer Calloway shifted uncomfortably, his confident smirk now gone. Marcus let the weight of his credentials settle in the air before speaking again. As a special investigator for the DOJ's Civil Rights Division, he continued, I specialize in cases of police misconduct and racial profiling. He glanced at Calloway. Would you like to reconsider your testimony, officer? Calloway stiffened. I stand by my statement. Marcus nodded, turning to Palmer. Ms. Palmer, as a prosecutor, you are responsible for ensuring justice is served. Did you know I was a federal investigator before taking this case? Palmer hesitated, glancing at Judge Whitaker. No, she admitted. We were not informed. Marcus took a slow breath. Then let's establish a few things. 1. There is no dashcam footage. 2. The officer claims I resisted arrest, but his version of events conveniently lacks key details. 3. The judge found my defense amusing, despite having no basis for dismissing my claims. Judge Whitaker shifted in his seat. Mr. Reed, Special Investigator Reed, Marcus corrected, his tone measured but firm. Whitaker's nostrils flared. Fine. Special Investigator Reed, you may have credentials, but you are still the defendant in this case. Marcus met his gaze without flinching. Am I? Or am I actually the one investigating a case of police misconduct? A ripple of murmurs spread through the gallery. Some of the jurors, who had been indifferent moments ago, now leaned forward. Marcus turned back to Calloway. Officer, let's go over the night in question again. You claimed I was speeding. What was my exact speed? Calloway's jaw tightened. I don't recall the exact number. You don't recall? Marcus raised an eyebrow. Yet you wrote me a ticket. It should be on record. Palmer quickly flipped through her files, searching for an answer. That's interesting, Marcus continued, because I checked the system before coming here. No radar data was recorded for my vehicle at the time of the stop. Palmer's eyes widened slightly. Judge Whitaker frowned. Calloway stammered. Well, I visually estimated. Marcus cut him off. Visual estimates don't hold up in court. They require corroborating evidence. You have none. Calloway clenched his fists. Marcus turned back to Whitaker. Your Honor, at this point we have an officer who cannot verify the reason for the stop, missing dashcam footage, and physical force used against me without justification. He gestured toward Palmer. I assume the prosecution would like to reconsider moving forward with these charges? Palmer hesitated. She glanced at Calloway, then at Whitaker. The tension in the room was thick. Before she could respond, the courtroom doors swung open. A man in a dark suit strode inside, followed by 2 other officials. Apologies for the interruption, the man said, flashing his own badge. Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Graves. We've been reviewing this case. He stepped forward, eyes scanning the room. It appears there are some serious procedural violations. Judge Whitaker's face darkened. On what grounds? Graves smirked. How about falsified reports and obstruction of justice? He turned to Calloway. Officer, we pulled internal records. Your body cam was operational the night of the stop. The footage exists. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Palmer's face drained of color. Calloway gripped the stand so tightly his knuckles turned white. Marcus folded his arms. I believe that concludes my defense. Whitaker slammed his gavel. This court is in recess. But everyone knew this case was far from over. But what exactly is on that missing body cam footage? And why was it hidden in the first place? The courtroom remained in stunned silence as Judge Whitaker banged his gavel, his voice tense. We will reconvene in 15 minutes. But no one moved. The weight of Assistant U.S. Attorney Daniel Graves' revelation hung in the air. Marcus remained standing, his expression calm but his mind racing. If the footage existed, it meant someone had deliberately hidden it. The question was why? Palmer, the prosecutor, hurriedly gathered her files, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Officer Calloway, still gripping the witness stand, looked as if he were calculating his next move. Graves turned to Marcus. "Step outside with me for a moment." Marcus followed him into the hallway. As soon as the doors shut, Graves lowered his voice. "We received an anonymous tip this morning. Someone inside the department flagged Calloway's report as suspicious. That led us to the body cam footage." Marcus frowned. "And you're just now bringing it up?" Graves sighed. "We had to confirm it first, but I have a feeling you already knew something wasn't right." Marcus nodded. "I had a strong suspicion." Graves glanced around, then leaned in. "Look, this case just got a lot bigger. Calloway isn't acting alone. There's a pattern of missing evidence in cases he's involved in. If we dig deeper, we might uncover something serious." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "You think there's a cover-up?" Graves exhaled. "I'd bet my career on it." Before Marcus could respond, the courtroom doors swung open. Judge Whitaker stepped out, looking irritated. He gestured for Graves and Marcus to follow him into his chambers. Inside, the judge shut the door and turned on them. "Do you have any idea what kind of mess you're stirring up?" His voice was low but sharp. Graves didn't flinch. "With all due respect, Your Honor, the mess was already here. We're just exposing it." Whitaker rubbed his temples. "I should have dismissed this case the moment Mr. Reed walked in waving his DOJ badge." Marcus folded his arms. "Would that have stopped the truth from coming out?" The judge's jaw tightened. "I don't have control over what happens next. But you need to be careful. This is bigger than one bad cop." Marcus studied him. There was something in Whitaker's tone. Was it a warning or a plea? Before he could press further, there was a knock on the door. A court officer stepped in. "Your Honor, the footage is being set up in the courtroom now." Whitaker sighed. "Then let's get this over with." Minutes later, everyone was back in the courtroom, this time with a different energy. The jury sat up straighter. The audience whispered in anticipation. Palmer cleared her throat. "Your Honor, we have retrieved the body cam footage. The prosecution would like to submit it into evidence." Whitaker nodded. "Proceed." A screen flickered to life. The footage showed Calloway approaching Marcus' car, his hand already on his holster. His tone was aggressive. "You look like trouble," Calloway sneered in the video. "Step out of the car." Marcus' voice was calm. "Officer, can you tell me why I'm being stopped?" Calloway chuckled. "You don't ask questions. You do what you're told." Then, without warning, Calloway grabbed Marcus by the arm and yanked him out. The camera shook as Marcus was slammed against the car. His voice was tight with pain. "I'm complying. There's no need for force." Calloway twisted his arm harder. "Stay down, boy." Gasps erupted in the courtroom. Someone in the audience muttered, "Unbelievable." On screen, Calloway leaned toward the camera, and just before the footage cut off, he smirked. "This won't go anywhere." "It never does." The video ended. Silence. Palmer's face was ashen. Graves stared at the screen, his expression unreadable. Marcus remained still. Judge Whitaker exhaled slowly. "Officer Calloway," he said, his voice dangerously calm, "do you have an explanation?" Calloway swallowed hard but said nothing. Marcus turned to Graves. "You were right. This is bigger than just him." Graves nodded. "The real question is who else is involved? How deep does this corruption go? And who is trying to keep it buried?" The weight of the body cam footage hung over the courtroom like a storm cloud. No one spoke. The jury sat frozen, their earlier indifference now replaced with shock. The murmurs in the audience grew louder. Judge Whitaker's grip on his gavel tightened, but even he seemed reluctant to break the silence. Marcus kept his eyes on Calloway. The officer's face was drained of color, his fists clenched at his sides. He was cornered, and he knew it. "Officer Calloway, Whitaker finally said, his voice colder than before. "You were caught on tape using excessive force and racial slurs. Do you deny what we just saw?" Calloway shifted in his seat. "Your Honor, this is being taken out of context." Marcus let out a quiet scoff. "What context would justify you slamming me against my car and calling me boy?" Calloway opened his mouth but hesitated. He had no answer. Palmer, the prosecutor, looked down at her files, as if trying to find a way out of this disaster. She had walked into court thinking this would be an easy conviction. Now, she was realizing she had been played by her own witness. Graves leaned forward. "Your Honor, based on the footage, the Department of Justice is prepared to open a formal investigation into Officer Calloway's actions." The words sent another ripple through the courtroom. Marcus didn't miss the way Judge Whitaker's expression darkened. "You want to turn this into a federal case?" Whitaker asked, voice tight. Graves nodded. "Given what we've just seen, we have no choice." Before the judge could respond, Calloway shot up from his seat. "This is ridiculous." His voice cracked. "I've been on the force for 10 years. You people have no idea how hard it is out there." Marcus remained calm. "Hard enough that you have to fabricate charges and assault innocent people." Calloway turned to Judge Whitaker. "Your Honor, I followed department procedures." Whitaker exhaled through his nose. "Sit down, officer." Calloway hesitated but obeyed. Marcus wasn't done. He turned to Palmer. "Ms. Palmer, did you have access to this footage before today?" Palmer's eyes darted toward the screen, then back at Marcus. "No," she admitted. "We were told the footage didn't exist." Marcus nodded. "And who told you that?" Palmer hesitated. Marcus pressed. "Because someone within law enforcement deliberately hid it. Someone wanted this case buried." He scanned the room. "And I think we all want to know who." Palmer swallowed hard. "The footage was flagged as corrupt in our system. When I asked for it, I was told there was nothing to review." "Who told you that?" Graves asked. Palmer hesitated again, then finally muttered, "Chief Daniels." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. The chief of police. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Even Whitaker seemed rattled. Graves turned to Marcus. "Well, that confirms it. We're dealing with a full-scale cover-up." Calloway stiffened. "I'm not the only one who," he stopped himself, biting his tongue. But it was too late. Marcus caught the slip immediately. He leaned forward. "You're not the only one who what, officer?" Calloway's eyes darted to the judge, then to Palmer, then back to the jury. He was unraveling. Whitaker cleared his throat, then straightened in his chair. "Given the new evidence, this case cannot proceed as originally intended." "Mr. Reed," Marcus held up a hand. "Special Investigator Reed." Whitaker's jaw tightened. "Special Investigator Reed, the charges against you are hereby dismissed." The courtroom burst into noise, some cheers, some outrage. Calloway slumped in his chair. Palmer looked like she wanted to disappear. Graves leaned in close. To Marcus. "We need to talk. Now." Marcus nodded. He had just been cleared, but this fight was far from over. As he walked toward the exit, his mind raced. If Chief Daniels was involved in covering up the footage, how deep did this corruption go? And more importantly, who else was willing to keep it hidden? If the chief of police helped cover this up, what else has been buried? Marcus barely had time to process his legal victory before Graves pulled him into a side room near the courtroom. The assistant U.S. attorney shut the door behind them and leaned in. "This isn't just about Calloway," Graves said in a hushed tone. "Chief Daniels directly intervened to bury that footage. That means this cover-up reaches the highest level of the department." Marcus nodded, his mind already working through the implications. "And if the chief was willing to suppress evidence on a minor case like mine, imagine what else he's buried." Graves sighed. "That's what we need to find out." Palmer entered the room a moment later, looking uneasy. Marcus arched an eyebrow. "Changed sides already?" Palmer frowned. I didn't know about the footage. I was lied to just like everyone else. And I don't appreciate being used as a pawn in a rigged case. Marcus studied her. She had been against him from the start, but now she seemed genuinely shaken. Graves nodded. Then help us. Palmer crossed her arms. If I do, my career is over. Graves smirked. Or your career takes a turn into federal prosecution. We need someone on the inside. Palmer hesitated, then sighed. What do you need? Graves wasted no time. We need internal records, any past cases where evidence went missing, officers with repeated complaints who were never disciplined, anything that points to a pattern. Palmer rubbed her temples. That's going to take time. Chief Daniels controls what gets released. If he suspects I'm looking, he'll shut me out. Marcus leaned in. Then we need a different way in. Palmer gave him a skeptical look. You have a plan? Marcus exhaled slowly. I need to talk to Calloway. Graves frowned. He's not going to flip that easily. Marcus smiled. Everyone flips when they realize they're the scapegoat. 10 minutes later, Marcus and Graves entered the holding cell where Calloway was being temporarily detained. The officer sat on the bench, his arms crossed, glaring at them. What do you want? Calloway spat. Marcus pulled up a chair and sat down across from him. I want to help you. Calloway barked out a laugh. Help me? You just destroyed my career. Marcus shrugged. No, your actions did that. But let's be honest, you're not the mastermind here. Someone gave the order to hide that footage. Someone told you to push bogus charges against me. And now that the truth is out, you think they're going to protect you. Calloway's jaw tightened. Marcus leaned in. I'll tell you what's going to happen. The department will cut you loose. Palmer's not going to protect you. Whitaker won't defend you. And Daniels? He'll make sure you take the fall so this all disappears. Calloway's fingers twitched. That's not, you already know it's true, Marcus interrupted. The question is, do you want to go down alone? Calloway stared at the floor. His bravado was slipping. Graves stepped forward. Cooperate, and we can cut you a deal. You tell us what you know, who ordered what, who else is involved, and we keep you out of prison. Calloway exhaled shakily. I need to think. Marcus shook his head. No, you need to act. Because once Daniels finds out we're talking to you, he'll make sure you don't have time to think. Calloway swallowed hard. Then, finally, he looked up. I'll talk. Marcus exchanged a glance with Graves. This was it. The dam was about to break. What secrets will Calloway reveal? And how far will Chief Daniels go to silence him? Calloway exhaled slowly, rubbing his hands together as if trying to warm them. The air in the holding cell felt heavier now, thick with tension. His eyes darted between Marcus and Graves, weighing his options. You don't get it, he finally muttered. You think Daniels is the top of this? He's just another piece on the board. Marcus leaned forward. Then tell us who's really pulling the strings. Calloway hesitated, glancing toward the security camera in the corner of the room. Graves followed his gaze, then turned back to him. You give us names, and we make sure you walk out of this with protection. But if you stall, Daniels will get to you first. Calloway clenched his jaw. His right leg bounced nervously. Then, finally, he spoke. It's bigger than Daniels, he admitted. He's involved, sure. But the real power? It's coming from the mayor's office. Marcus and Graves exchanged a look. The mayor? Graves asked, skeptical. Calloway nodded. Not just him. There's a whole system in place. Daniels is just one of the enforcers. The orders come from above. Marcus frowned. Orders for what? Calloway licked his lips, his voice lowering. Selective policing. Targeting certain neighborhoods, pushing up. Arrest numbers to justify funding. And when an officer steps out of line or gets caught, the evidence disappears. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. How many cases? Calloway shook his head. More than I can count. He hesitated before adding, but I can get you proof. Graves narrowed his eyes. How? Calloway exhaled. There's a secure server at headquarters off the books. Daniels keeps records there. Old case files. Complaints that were buried, body cam footage that never made it into evidence. Everything. Marcus's mind raced. If they could access that server, they could blow the entire operation open. Who has access? Marcus asked. Calloway hesitated. Daniels, obviously. A few higher-ups. But there's one guy who manages the system, Lieutenant Eric Nolan. If you want the files, you'll need to go through him. Graves nodded. Then we need to move fast. Marcus stood up. We'll get you out of here, Calloway. But if you're lying, I'm not, Calloway interrupted. I want out. Daniels won't protect me anymore. Marcus studied him for a moment before nodding. Then sit tight. We'll be back. An hour later, Marcus and Graves stood in a quiet federal office, going over the details with Palmer. So, let me get this straight, Palmer said, rubbing her temple. The LAPD has a hidden database of buried cases, and the only way to access it is through a guy who works directly under Daniels? Marcus nodded. That's right. Palmer scoffed. Well, that sounds like an easy mission. Just walk in and ask nicely, right? Graves smirked. Not exactly. Marcus placed a file on the table. Nolan has a routine. He works late, usually past midnight. If we approach him outside of the office, we might have a chance to flip him. Palmer frowned. And if he refuses? Marcus sighed. Then we find another way in. Palmer crossed her arms. You realize Daniels is probably already moving to destroy those files, right? Graves nodded. Which is why we don't have time to waste. Marcus checked his watch. Nolan's shift ends in 3 hours. We need to be ready. The room fell silent for a moment. They all knew this wasn't just about exposing one bad cop anymore. This was about taking down an entire system. And they had one shot to get it right. Can they reach Nolan before Daniels erases the evidence? Or is it already too late? Marcus gripped the steering wheel as he and Graves drove toward LAPD headquarters. The plan was simple: find Lieutenant Eric Nolan before Daniels could wipe the server clean. But nothing about this situation felt simple. We need to assume Daniels already knows we're onto him, Graves said, checking his phone. Which means he's either having the files destroyed right now or moving them somewhere we'll never find. Marcus nodded. Then we'd better get to Nolan before he disappears too. Graves exhaled. If he's even willing to talk. Marcus tightened his grip. Everyone talks when the walls start closing in. The car sped through the city streets, their destination looming ahead. Eric Nolan sat alone in his dimly lit office, scrolling through his computer screen. His face was tight with stress. He had seen the court hearing earlier that day. The fact that the body cam footage had surfaced meant something had gone terribly wrong. His phone buzzed. A single text from an unknown number. Shut it down. Now. Nolan's breath hitched. He didn't need to ask who it was. He knew. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. Deleting the server files would protect him, keep him in Daniel's good graces. But if things were unraveling this quickly, did he really want to be the one left holding the bag? A knock at his office door made him jump. He spun around, heart pounding. Who is it? A voice came through, calm but firm. Lieutenant Nolan, we need to talk. Nolan hesitated. Then slowly he unlocked the door. Marcus and Graves stepped inside, closing it behind them. Nolan forced a weak smile. This is highly irregular. Graves smirked. So is hiding a secret database of buried cases. Nolan paled. I don't know what you're talking about. Marcus crossed his arms. Calloway told us everything. We know the files exist. We know Daniels runs it. And we know you're the one maintaining it. Nolan swallowed. I have no idea. Graves cut him off. You're running out of time. Daniels just sent you a message, didn't he? Nolan froze. How did you? Marcus smirked. Because we know how people like him work. He's not coming to save you, Nolan. He's coming to make sure you disappear along with the files. Nolan's hands trembled. He looked at the computer screen, then back at them. If I help you, I'm dead. Marcus took a step closer. If you don't help us, you're either going to prison or taking the fall for everything. Your choice. Nolan's breathing was shallow. His mind was racing. Then, with a shaking hand, he turned to his computer. You don't understand what's on this server. Graves narrowed his eyes. Then show us. Nolan typed a few commands, and the screen flickered. A list of cases appeared, dozens, then hundreds. Marcus felt his stomach tighten as he scanned the names. Stolen evidence. Suppressed complaints. Fabricated charges. Cases where suspects had disappeared after arrests. Graves let out a low whistle. This isn't just corruption. This is an organized operation. Nolan nodded. The department's been doing this for years. Some of these cases go all the way to the mayor's office. Marcus clenched his jaw. How many innocent people have been locked up because of this? Nolan swallowed hard. Too many. Marcus exhaled sharply. Download everything. Now. Nolan hesitated. Once I do this, there's no going back. Graves smirked. There was never any going back, Nolan. Nolan took a deep breath, then hit download. A loading bar appeared. 35%. 40%. 45%. A sound made them all freeze. Footsteps. Right outside the office. Nolan's face turned white. They're here. Marcus reached for his phone. We need an exit now. Graves glanced at the loading screen. 65%. The doorknob rattled. And then someone tried to force it open. Will they escape with the evidence? Or will Daniel's men shut them down for good? The rattling at the door turned into hard pounding. Lieutenant Nolan, a voice barked from outside. Open up. Nolan's hands shook as he looked from the door to the loading bar on the screen. 78%. 80%. They're going to break it down, he whispered. Marcus moved fast, scanning the room. Is there another way out? Nolan shook his head. No windows. Only the main door. Graves pulled his gun from its holster, but kept it low. We can't shoot our way out of a police station. We need a distraction. Marcus turned to Nolan. Stall them. Act like nothing's wrong. If they see us in here, we're dead. Nolan hesitated, but the fear in his eyes told Marcus he understood. He stood, smoothing his uniform as he walked to the door. Marcus and Graves moved quickly, flattening against the wall beside the doorway. Out of sight. Nolan cracked the door open, just enough to see who was outside. 2 officers stood there, their expressions cold. The taller one, a stocky sergeant, peered inside. Daniels wants to see you. Now. Nolan forced a confused frown. What for? The sergeant's eyes narrowed. You really have to ask? Let's go. Nolan hesitated. Behind him, the screen showed 95%. 96%. Marcus held his breath. I'm in the middle of system maintenance, Nolan said, keeping his voice steady. Can it wait? The shorter officer pushed forward. No. You need to come now. Marcus saw it before Nolan did, the sergeant's hand drifting toward his holster. Move, the officer snapped, stepping inside. Marcus acted on instinct. In a blur, he grabbed the officer's arm, twisting it sharply and slamming him against the wall. Before the second officer could react, Graves stepped forward, pressing his gun into the man's back. Not a good idea, friend. The sergeant grunted, struggling. You're making a mistake. Marcus tightened his grip. You already made yours. The screen pinged. Download complete. Graves grabbed a flash drive from the computer and shoved it into his pocket. We got it. Marcus turned back to Nolan. Time to go. Marcus shoved the sergeant into the corner while Graves locked the office door. That won't hold them for long, Nolan muttered. Marcus scanned the hallway through the small glass window. The station was still busy, officers walking back and forth, unaware of what had just happened. But that wouldn't last. Graves checked his watch. Daniels will know something's up any second now. Marcus turned to Nolan. What's the fastest way out of here? Nolan took a shaky breath. The back exit near the evidence locker. It leads to an employee parking lot. Graves grinned. Perfect. Let's move. They slipped out of the office, keeping their heads low. Marcus forced himself to walk calmly. Running would draw attention. As they passed through the hall, a loud voice boomed over the station's intercom. Attention all officers. Lockdown in effect. Secure all exits. Marcus cursed under his breath. They turned a corner just as two uniformed officers rushed past them, heading toward Nolan's office. We need to move faster, Graves whispered. Nolan led them through a narrow hallway, past stacks of old case files and locked storage rooms. Then, suddenly voices ahead. Marcus pulled Nolan back just as two officers stepped into view near the exit. We have to go another way, Nolan whispered. No time, Graves muttered. He pulled out his phone and dialed. A second later, Palmer's voice answered. Where the hell are you? Trapped inside, Graves said. We need a distraction. Palmer cursed. Fine. Stay low. A moment later, the station's fire alarm blared. The officers near the exit looked up in confusion. Marcus saw the opening. Go! They pushed forward, slipping past the distracted officers and bursting through the back door. The cool night air hit them as they ran into the parking lot. Behind them, the sound of shouting voices grew louder. Graves pointed to a black SUV parked near the exit. That's ours. They sprinted toward it. As Marcus reached for the door handle, a single gunshot rang out. A bullet slammed into the car's side mirror, shattering it. They spun around. Daniels stood at the station's back door, gun raised, his face livid. You don't know what you're doing, he growled. Marcus met his eyes. No, Daniels. You don't. They jumped into the SUV, and Graves floored the gas. Tires screeched as they tore out of the lot, speeding into the city. Inside, Marcus clutched the flash drive. They had the evidence. But now, Daniels would do anything to stop them. With the truth in their hands, can they survive long enough to expose it? Daniels is cornered. But does he have one last trick? The SUV roared through the streets of Los Angeles, weaving between cars as Graves kept the gas pedal pinned to the floor. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, gripping the flash drive like his life depended on it, because it did. In the back seat, Nolan was breathing hard, panic still written all over his face. Daniels won't stop, he muttered. He'll send the whole department after us. Graves glanced at the rearview mirror. Yeah, well, he better send them fast because we're not slowing down. Marcus turned, looking out the back window. His stomach tightened. Two black SUVs were already tailing them. Daniels just sent the cavalry, Marcus said. Graves cursed under his breath. Hold on. He jerked the wheel hard to the right, cutting down a narrow side street. The tires screeched as they barely avoided clipping a parked car. The pursuing SUVs weren't as lucky. One slammed into a fire hydrant, water exploding into the air. But the second SUV kept coming. Nolan clutched the seat. We can't outrun them forever. Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed Palmer. She answered immediately. Tell me you're safe. Marcus shook his head. Not even close. Daniels sent a team after us. Palmer swore. You have the files? Yes, but if we don't lose them, it won't matter. Palmer was silent for a beat. Then, where are you? Marcus checked the street signs, flashing past. 6 blocks from the federal building. Good. Get here now. I'll call ahead and get you protection. Marcus ended the call. Graves, get us to the federal building. Palmer's setting up security. Graves smirked. Copy that. He yanked the wheel again, cutting through an intersection just as the light turned red. The pursuing SUV tried to follow and was immediately T-boned by an oncoming delivery truck. Marcus watched in the mirror as the wreck spun out of control. That's one way to stop them. But their relief Didn't last long. Nolan pointed ahead. Roadblock. Two LAPD cruisers had parked diagonally across the street, lights flashing. Officers were already stepping out, weapons drawn. Not good, Graves muttered. Marcus thought fast. We can't fight our way through. We need a way around. Graves scanned the streets. Then his eyes landed on a narrow alley between two buildings. That's our shot. Marcus followed his gaze. You sure the SUV will? Fee. Graves grinned. Only one way to find out. He cranked the wheel, and the SUV shot into the alleyway. The walls closed in on both sides, inches from the doors. The side mirror scraped against a dumpster, snapping off. Nolan shut his eyes. We're gonna die. Marcus smirked. Not today. The SUV burst out onto another street, dodging past a stunned pedestrian. Behind them, the police cars were stuck too wide to follow. Graves whooped. I love this car. Marcus checked the time. 3 minutes to the federal building. They weren't safe yet. As they neared the federal courthouse, a third SUV appeared up ahead, blocking the entrance. Marcus cursed. Daniels is pulling out all the stops. Graves gritted his teeth. Then we go through. He hit the gas. The black SUV in front of them revved its engine, and suddenly the driver's side door opened. Daniels stepped out. Right in their path. Marcus' breath caught. He's bluffing. But Daniels didn't move. He just stood there, arms crossed, watching them barrel toward him. 50 feet. 40. 30. At the last second, Graves swerved. The SUV screeched to a halt just inches from Daniels. Daniels didn't even flinch. Slowly, he walked toward them, tapping the hood of their car with his fingers. Marcus rolled down the window, his pulse pounding. Daniels smiled. You really think you won? Marcus held up the flash drive. I don't think. I know. Daniels' smirk faded. Marcus nodded toward the courthouse. Now get out of our way. Daniels glanced behind him. Federal agents were already coming out of the building, weapons drawn. For the first time, Daniels looked uncertain. Marcus leaned forward. Checkmate. Daniels exhaled slowly. Then, without a word, he stepped aside. Marcus, Graves, and Nolan drove past, rolling through the gates of the federal courthouse. They were safe. For now. Daniels is cornered, but does he have one last trick up his sleeve? The moment the SUV rolled past the courthouse gates, Marcus exhaled, his grip on the flash drive finally loosening. Graves pulled into the secured parking lot, the vehicle coming to a smooth stop. Outside, a dozen federal agents stood waiting. Among them, Palmer hurried forward, her face a mix of relief and urgency. Do you have it? She asked. Marcus held up the flash drive. Every file, every cover-up. Daniels' entire operation. Palmer nodded, motioning to the agents. Let's get inside before he makes another move. The group hurried toward the entrance, but Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It was too easy. Daniels had let them through. He had stepped aside, knowing what was on this drive. Why? Graves noticed his hesitation. What's wrong? Marcus looked back toward the gate, but Daniels was gone. Something doesn't add up. He let us go. No resistance. Palmer frowned. He didn't have a choice. He was outnumbered. Marcus shook his head. Daniels doesn't play unless he knows the game is already rigged. Then, as if to confirm his suspicion, Marcus' phone buzzed. He pulled it out, seeing an unknown number. He answered, putting it on speaker. Daniels' voice came through, smooth and calm. Congratulations, Investigator Reed. You won. Marcus clenched his jaw. For someone who lost, you don't sound too worried. Daniels chuckled. Because I never lose. A cold chill crept down Marcus' spine. What did you do? Daniels sighed. You think I didn't prepare for this? That server you downloaded? It's a fraction of what really exists. The moment you accessed it, I had everything erased. You have proof of past crimes, sure. But current operations? Future plans? Gone. Marcus' stomach twisted. You're bluffing. Daniels smirked. Am I? Palmer grabbed the flash drive and pulled up a laptop, inserting it. A list of files appeared, but as she scrolled, her face darkened. No, she whispered. Marcus leaned over. The files were there, but they were all timestamped from years ago. Nothing recent. No active cases. No proof that the operation was still running. Daniels had outplayed them. See, Daniels continued, his voice smug, I'll let you in just enough to think you had me. The public will be outraged for a while. Some old cases will get reopened. Maybe a few people lose their badges. But me? He chuckled. I walk away clean. Graves cursed under his breath. We still have enough to put you away. Daniels sighed. Do you? An operation this big? You really think the city is going to let it fall apart? People higher than me will make sure this gets buried. Marcus' mind raced. Daniels was right, the system wouldn't allow itself to collapse. Even with the evidence, they were still fighting an uphill battle. But then, Marcus glanced at Nolan. The lieutenant looked pale, shaken. He had been part of the system for years, but now, he was here. And that gave Marcus an idea. He spoke into the phone. You're right, Daniels. The system will protect you. Evidence alone won't be enough. Daniels chuckled. Glad you're finally learning. But, Marcus continued, a witness is another story. The line went silent. Daniels knew. Marcus turned to Nolan. You worked on that server. You know how it operates. You know what was erased. Nolan swallowed hard. I do. Marcus met his eyes. Then testify. Blow the whole thing wide open. Palmer's eyes widened. That would change everything. Nolan hesitated, fear flashing across his face. If I do this, I'll never be safe. Marcus nodded. Neither will Daniels. Once you speak, he's done. The system will turn on him just to save itself. Nolan looked at the flash drive, then at the agents surrounding him. Finally, he took a deep breath. I'll do it. Daniel's voice finally came back on the line. But now there was no arrogance, just quiet anger. You just made a very dangerous choice, Reed. Marcus smirked. So did you. Daniels hung up. Palmer exhaled. We need to get Nolan into protection immediately. Graves cracked his knuckles. And we need to prepare for whatever Daniels does next. Marcus nodded. They had won a battle, but the war was still going. Daniels wasn't finished. But neither were they. A week later, the headlines hit. LAPD corruption scandal exposed. Whistleblower speaks out against police chief. Mayor's office under investigation. Daniels resigned the next day. He wasn't arrested yet, but his career was over. The system had turned on him to save itself. Marcus stood outside the courthouse, watching the press swarm Nolan as he was escorted into a secure vehicle. Graves joined him. You really think this changes anything? Marcus exhaled. Not everything, but it's a start. Palmer approached, arms crossed. We shook the foundation. Now we watch who tries to rebuild it. Marcus nodded. They weren't done, because justice wasn't about one case. It was about all of them. And as long as the system tried to hide the truth, he would be there to uncover it. Justice isn't just about winning one battle, it's about exposing the truth, no matter how deep the corruption runs. Marcus Reed fought back, but stories like his happen every day. The question is, who will stand up next? If you enjoyed this story and want to see more gripping narratives like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Hit that like button, turn on notifications, and let us know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from?